started making games with RPG Maker XP back when I was 8 years old, and it was great. Like, it provided everything I needed to just focus on telling the stories I wanted. And I realized I'm not as good at telling stories as I thought I was, because I didn't have a narrative system that I could just add, that I could input some narrative or storytelling problems and get a solution for them. But through experimenting with RPG Maker, I tried to replicate some games that I was a huge fan, like .hack GU. I'm a huge fan of .hack GU series, especially I tried to recreate the world revision tool inside RPG Maker, but it didn't went well because everything is way more complex than we think they are. But it was when I was 12 years old, I made a promise to some friends that I would recreate Ragnarok Online someday, or a game as cool as Ragnarok Online, because we spent a lot of time with Ragnarok. I was really addicted to this game, and I made this promise to them, thinking that it would be easy to basically just recreate this game instead of just creating something basic. And I did create a private server that was one of the most successful ones, because we tried to create the world of Naruto inside Naruto, the anime, inside Ragnarok. It was a great private server, but actually I didn't create this server, but it was when I joined the development team when I was 15 years old that the server really got some traction and some money. And through this promise, I decided that I would get into the game industry. And by studying Ragnarok Online and RPG games, and more specifically adventure games in general, I figured out that there are 5 fundamental, the bread and butter of any adventure game that we need to develop to get something, to get out of the zero state, so out from the blank page. And in this video, I'm going to show you what are these 5 systems that every adventure game must have in order to create an adventure, to engage players into an adventure. So let's get started. RPG games are recognized for having rich worlds that players can explore to understand the background story and the overall context of the game, right? In their book, Kate Salin and Eric Zimmerman, this is the Brazilian Portuguese version, but it's called Rules of Play, they present the concept of narrative descriptors, which are anything that tells something about the game's story or narrative. This can range from like the game package, so the instructions, the manual itself from the game, right? This was very common in old games. To the game title itself, the game title is a narrative descriptor as well. It tells something about the game story. So for instance, the Final Fantasy is about a fantasy game, so it's not about something that represents the reality. And this can also go to elements of the game world itself, which they call the magic circle, the context of the game when players are actually playing the game. So things like objects, collectible objects, non-playable characters, so NPCs as well, the environment design, the levels, so on and so forth. Anything that tells something about the game narrative can be a narrative descriptor. And games like Hollow Knight or the Souls-like series don't tell anything, they don't present anything directly to the players, but allow them to just explore the game, to interact with the game world and unfold this narrative, so they can understand the narrative by exploring the game world. So the game itself doesn't present anything direct to players like we used to do with games like, for instance, on the introduction stage of Mega Man X, there is a background story introduction so players understand what are the settings of the game, right? But regardless of your approach, if you want to do one or the other, you will need an interaction system, because this is the major feature of any adventure game. We have 3 types of game elements, of gameplay elements when we talk about game design. We have action elements we use to test the player's ability to react in real time to game events. We have strategy elements which we use to test the player's ability to manage game resources, and we have adventure elements which we use to test the player's ability to reveal information about the game. So anything that players can do to reveal information about the game, or any information that needs to be revealed through players' interactions with the game, are adventure elements. And in that sense, players need to interact with the game world in order to reveal such information, right? And for that, you are going to need an interaction system, something that detects when players press a given button or a given input, so that something can happen. I remember that in RPG Maker, we used to call this cause and effect relationship events, which leads us to the next system, which is the event system. When players interact with an object or an NPC in the game world, something should happen. Otherwise, this is not interactable, right? The game world would not respond to players' interaction, so this would not be an interactive experience. So for instance, if players interact with a closed treasure chest, the treasure chest should open and add whatever item to the player's inventory. Regardless of the interaction that would happen, something must manage this cause-effect relationships. So this is what we call an event system, a system that you can coordinate a sequence of events that are triggered by players' interactions. So for instance, if the player interact with an NPC, the NPC can open a shop, or they can animate something like move, so that players have the feeling that this NPC is responding to their actions. What typically happens when you interact with an NPC is that the NPC will talk with the player, right? So this will trigger the dialogue system, which is the next system that we are going to talk about. The cheapest and most effective way to tell a story directly to players is using text. For that, we typically use what is known as a drama. Drama is a technique where we present the story, where we present the narrative to the interlocutor, which in our case is the player, as if they were listening directly from the subjects of the story itself, as the story is getting built. So as these subjects build this story, so we don't have the big picture of the story yet. This goes in opposition to an epic, where the narrator, so the person that is telling the story, is aware of everything that happened in this specific story. It has way more information about the story than the subjects of the story itself. So in an epic, the narrator tells the story, tells the facts as if they already happened, because it has knowledge of the facts. In games, we typically use the drama approach because we allow players to build their own story, usually. So instead of telling the stories to players as if the story already happened and they can have no choice in this story, we allow them to create the story and to experience the feeling of getting this story built with the actions. There are many exceptions to that. This is not like a huge imbalance in these two approaches, but to understand better how epics are usually told in games, we can think about Stanley Parable. This is an excellent example of an epic, especially because Stanley Parable doesn't take the story as if it was already built. The narrator is aware of everything, but it changes the story, it changes the narrative as players are choosing how the narrative is built. So you can make choices and the narrator will adapt the story based on what you made. But this still takes the premise that the narrator is aware of the narrative and it tells as if the facts already happened, even though you are building them in real time. But it's a great example of an epic. But we have other stories, right? So for instance, Final Fantasy, so I can think of Final Fantasy 12, where between some chapters, the narrator presents what happened in the story as well. But regardless of your narrative style, the way that you are going to present this information to players will need a dialogue system. So, for instance, think about these NPCs or these subjects, the people that are part of this story talking, right? You, from the player's perspective, they can listen this story from three perspectives. So we have the first person, the third person, and the second person, which is way more common than people think it is. But people usually think that, well, in games we usually just have the first person and the third person perspective, but no. So the third person is when two characters are speaking to each other and the players are basically passive in this narrative. They are listening to them talking. Even if the player is playing with an avatar that is a part of this dialogue. So, for instance, let's take Final Fantasy. Even if you're playing with VIII, when VIII is talking with another character, from the player's perspective, they are a third person in this conversation. The other way around is when we talk in the first person dialogue. So when we have access to characters' thoughts. So when the character speaks to himself, this is basically a first person dialogue. And when the game designers are speaking directly to players, this is a second person dialogue. So for instance, this is typically used when we want to present some system message, such as you open the door, you open the treasure chest, you talk with this NPC, you pick this item, you finished this quest, which, by the way, is the next system that we are going to talk about, the quest system. There is a core game design technique that we use to guide players through the game known as carrot dangling. The idea that we are going to attach a reward to a given task and ensure that players are always aware of this given task. So for instance, if we think about Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, the task of getting into the hero castle and defeating Ganon is literally always at players' side. So no matter where players are in this open world game, they would be able to look at some point, at some direction, and find the tower of the hero castle. And they are aware that everything that they are doing is meant to allow them to get into this castle and defeating Ganon. And when we talk about story, we have what is known as narrative beats or story beats, which are major milestones that we create to progress the story towards its goal. So this is very hard to implement in games because it's hard to balance players' free will and free agency with a pre-designed story, right? We could talk about like emergency and how we can create dynamic stories that adapt themselves to players' choices. But let's be honest, guys, if we are making an RPG game, we already have a story in mind that we want to tell to players, and all we want is to guide them through this story so that they can experience what we are proposing to them. And to guide players through these narrative beats, we can make use of quests, which are basically that. So they are tasks that have a reward attached to them and are always at the player's side. So we have like quest journals or any other user interface element that will provide this information to players. Usually quests have implications about the state. So the quest system is responsible to manage quest state. So when the quest is available, when it is accepted, when it is active, when it is finished, and once it's completed, and once it's finished. And based on these states, this quest system can communicate to other systems what are the events that should happen based on the quest state. So for instance, if in Skyrim, right? So we have Skyrim, it has like infinite amount of quests, but on some tasks, on some quests, you have like a choice to make that will imply that you won't be able to make other choices. So for instance, if I remember correctly, if you finish the Silverhand quest line, you won't be able to start the Bloodline quest line, right? But if you finish the Silverhand quest line, you will be able to become a werewolf, which is always cool. And if you are the kind of person that would rather become a vampire instead by finish the Bloodline quest, you have very questionable moral choices, but I diverge. Since quests always imply that there will be a definite impact based on players' decisions, so in this case, if players decided to go with the Silverhand questline instead of the Bloodline questline, they won't be able to have both. This kind of choice must be stored in the system so that when players come back to the game, they would have the sense that this game is responding to their actions and their actions have an impact, a huge impact in the game. And for that, we use a persistency system to store players' decision into a file that we can load to recreate this world. And well, people usually also call this system a saving system, which is the next system that we are going to talk about. Not every player has the same tolerance for long play sessions as hardcore players, or sometimes players need to undo some bad decisions, or maybe they need a shortcut to get access to a specific point in the game that they want to replay sometime. For instance, I love Ginsu 3 Water Escape section from Ori and the Blind Forest. I love this segment of the game. I do have a save point, a save file specifically to come back to this point in the game so that I can experience this tension building followed by this relief that this play session has, that this segment has. Regardless of what is the reason, players do need the feeling that they can progress in this game at their own pace. And we need to provide this safety to players. So we need to make sure that players will understand that they can leave the game, and when they come back, they won't lose the progress that they made. And for that, we can use a saving system. The saving system is responsible for storing and loading the data relevant for recreating the game state that was built by players before they leave the game. So for instance, we need to store information about the player's character, so the HP, the experience, the level, the major attributes, the equipment, the inventory. Sometimes some games store information about the NPC states as well, so if players have a given emotional state with an NPC, this needs to be stored. Some games store information about some buildings in the game, so if players destroy the building, this will need to be stored as well, so on and so forth. Regardless of what you need to store in your saving file to recreate the state of the game that players created, you are going to need the saving system, which is going to create this file so that we can recreate this game state. So saving systems need to be flexible enough to allow us to save, well, what we need, so anything in our game, but they also need to be robust enough so players don't screw up the saving files and cheat in the game, right? If you want to create a saving system, I have one ready for you to use. I will put the link in the description and at the end screen as well, so that you can watch this video about how you can create a saving system just like I'm creating mine. And if you want to learn how you can make these 5 systems and finally create this RPG that you've been dreaming about for years like me, I want to present you my Godot Adventure Essentials course, where I'm going to teach you how you can create your first adventure game within 5 days. The course is for people who love Godot engine and are enthusiasts of adventure games. If you're interested, I will recommend you to take the free class so that you can understand my teaching approach and see if it fits your learning needs. If you want to know more about the course and get some questions answered, I will recommend you to get at the bottom of the courses page. There is a frequent asked questions section that is going to answer some frequent asked questions. But if yours is not on this section yet, or if you have other questions that you want to get responded, you can get in touch with me in the provided communication channels. So I put the link in the description for the courses page as well, and at the bottom you can get in touch with me on X, Discord or Telegram. By learning how to create and use these 5 systems, we can not only create RPG games, but add adventure elements to any sort of game as well. So for instance, if you want to turn your platformer game into a Metroidvania like Hollow Knight, you can use these systems to create quests, to create some events, to add NPCs to your game and create dialogues that will tell the background story to your player, and you can save the player's progress, which is something very generic that every game should have at this point. And if you want to know more about how you can design and develop games with open source tools like Godot engine, subscribe to the channel to get more videos and turn on the notification bell, because I know that only 30% of you guys are actually subscribed to the channel. So people get notified about my videos, but they are not part of my community. So subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell so that when I release a video, you'll be notified. And if you like this one specifically, leave a thumbs up and comment below. Were you a RPG Maker kid as well? I bet some of you guys started this journey using RPG Maker just like me. But for this video, that's it. Thank you so much for watching. Keep developing, and until the next one, see you there.